The neighbor in question, who could be described as a neighbor from hell, attempts to steal our house. However, her own actions result in her being slapped with a bill for $200. Before we commence, it is necessary to introduce the principal characters. The neighbor in question will henceforth be referred to as ingoing neighbor, and the son of the aforementioned neighbor will be designated as entitled son. Additionally, we have the previous owner of the property, who will be referred to as P.O. It should be noted that P.O.'s role in this narrative is limited. It is also important to contextualize the timeline of events. The period between the purchase of the property and the present day spans approximately 15 years. Therefore, unless otherwise stated, it can be assumed that significant time has passed between the events in question. It should be noted that there is a significant temporal gap between the majority of the events that will be described. To provide context and properly establish the sequence of events, it is necessary to provide some background information. The majority of these events occurred prior to our purchase and subsequent occupation of the house in question. At that time, we owned a sizable plot of land situated in close proximity to a popular recreational lake in our area. While we lived down the road from the lake, the distance is, in fact, considerable, despite the fact that the road in question is the sole access route to numerous lakefront properties and resorts, as well as the most popular boat dock on this side of the lake. Consequently, the properties in this area are not of an extremely high value, and are not within the financial reach of the general public. However, there are a number of extremely valuable properties located further down the road, which are frequented by individuals of considerable wealth. This will become relevant at a later stage in the narrative. The story begins with Karen, a wealthy individual with ownership of a considerable portion of property. Upon the children's reaching adulthood, she divided her property into 4 approximately equal sections. She initially gifted one section to her daughter, who, despite the rest of her family's questionable character, is a commendable individual. She then proceeded to construct houses on both properties, adhering to her children's specifications. The 4th section was allocated for the construction of a convenience store. She did not have her own residence on the property, instead, she constructed a small convenience store. This will also be relevant later on. The reason for this is unclear, but it may have been to avoid potential future disputes. Ultimately, she transferred the deeds to her children for their respective houses and properties. As the plot thickens, we see that while the respectable daughter was quite respectable, the irresponsible son was a party to the situation. He was the subject of much neighborhood animosity. He hosted frequent, late-night parties that often disrupted the sleep of his neighbors. The police were called on him so often that they apparently had a police officer stationed nearby. His mother paid all of his bills, which likely contributed to his sense of entitlement. All utilities, including water, electricity, and garbage collection, were in her name. One exception is notable, however. The property was in his name, as was the property tax. He did not remit this to the authorities, however, and it would appear that he either did not consider this to be his responsibility or assumed that he was paying it himself. In any case, it was not a great surprise when the police showed up at his house. It was, however, a surprise when he did not return, and the house was subsequently auctioned. At this point, the house was in a state of disrepair, with holes in the drywall and other damage. A significant breach was observed in the floor of the room, which led down into the garage basement. The kitchen floor and subfloor were in a state of severe deterioration, with the majority of walls bearing visible traces of mud. The accumulation of these factors collectively contributed to the house being deemed uninhabitable by the banks. Consequently, the only individuals who could afford to purchase the property were those who were in a position to pay the requisite sum outright. The purchaser was a house flipper, rather than one of the more affluent individuals. The activities depicted on television were not representative of this individual's pursuits. Rather, he engaged in house flipping as a hobby, a pursuit that provided him with a sense of purpose and engagement during his retirement. He would purchase a property at a significantly discounted price at an auction, then undertake the repairs and renovations himself. Once the property was restored to a marketable condition, he would place it back on the market. The profit from the sale of the previous property would then be reinvested into the next purchase. However, the profit typically diminished or ceased to exist altogether by the time he had completed the repairs and purchased the next property. We accessed an emergency savings fund, which he asserted was of no particular consequence. We were seeking a new residence, but our budget precluded the purchase of a property with significant value. However, when we observed this listing on a real estate website, it appeared to align with our criteria. It was an optimal size, situated in an ideal neighborhood, and conveniently located near a lake, which we enjoy for fishing and boating. We were initially hesitant about the price, which was not listed on the website. However, it seemed prudent to view the property in Atlanta East to gain a better understanding of its potential. We drove by to take a closer look and discovered that it was undergoing renovations. We stopped by to inquire about the price and the status of the property. The owner explained that he planned to refurbish it and sell it. He mentioned that his realtor had recently added it to the website's database to streamline the process when he was ready to sell. We proceeded to have a brief discussion with him. We engaged in a cordial conversation with him and conveyed our willingness to purchase the property at a fair price, given its current condition and the work already invested. We highlighted that we were interested in completing the renovations and occupying the house as our long-term residence. However, he declined our proposal, citing multiple offers and reservations about selling to us. We were informed that we could purchase the property for the full asking price once the renovations were complete. We thanked him for his time and left our contact information, requesting that he contact us if he changed his mind. Less than 2 weeks later, we received an unexpected call from him. He explained that his sister had fallen ill and was hospitalized in another state, and that he wanted to go and be with her. He stated that he would not have enough time or patience to complete the renovations. The house was not up to code, but if we could find a way to purchase it, he would be amenable to selling it to us for a reasonable price. We readily concurred and began searching for banks. We had a few connections from a realtor friend of ours who was able to assist us in finding a bank willing to loan us the money to purchase the house, with a few conditions attached. Essentially, we would have 2 weeks to bring the house up to code, otherwise the bank could default on the loan and auction it off. After elucidating the circumstances to P.O., he proffered assistance. However, due to time constraints, he was unable to undertake any physical work on the property. Instead, he delineated the requisite steps to bring the house into compliance with the minimum code requirements, the estimated time and effort required, and the associated costs. He even extended an offer to provide assistance in other ways. We proceeded to secure a loan for twice the original asking price. We obtained a loan for twice the amount that the contractor had initially requested for the work. We used the remaining half of the loan for repairs to the house. After the initial work was completed, we determined that it was nearly compliant with the relevant building codes. However, to ensure that everything was done correctly, we called in a few friends and completed the remaining work in half the time. Nevertheless, there were still a number of tasks that required attention. Consequently, we spent several months replacing flooring and subflooring. We also undertook extensive repairs to the walls, replacing old wallpaper that was no longer viable and adhered directly to the drywall. It is evident that we invested a considerable amount of effort into the property. However, it was eventually time to relocate to our desired residence. Despite the ongoing work, we were able to move in and commence our new life. It was finally time to move in, but we were not yet finished with the process. And came to introduce herself while we were still in the midst of negotiating with Pa. He had repeatedly cautioned us about Anne and her perceived sense of entitlement. Initially, Anne was cordial, and we had no reason to believe that she would pose a problem. The rationale behind Poe's repeated warnings about Anne is unclear. As we were concluding our discussion, she informed us in a cordial and empathetic manner that our residence was, in fact, under her ownership and that we had 30 days to vacate the premises. She expressed sympathy for our situation, citing the unfortunate circumstances surrounding our purchase, but asserted that we were informed that the property in question was, in fact, her own, and that we had no legal right to occupy it. We had previously encountered similar accounts of individuals who had been similarly deceived, and thus, we were understandably disconcerted when she proceeded to elucidate the circumstances to us. We were dismayed to realize that we had invested a considerable amount of time, effort, and financial resources into this residence, only to be confronted with the possibility of losing it. As a result of our initial misperceptions, we were now facing the prospect of losing the property. We expressed our gratitude for her candor and kindness and indicated our intention to consult with the bank and P.O. to resolve the matter. Consequently, we engaged in discussions with the bank, which corroborated P.O.'s status as the rightful proprietor of the property. We consulted with the realtor, who corroborated our account. We also spoke with P.O., who stated that they had accused him of stealing the house on multiple occasions after purchasing it at auction. Furthermore, they claimed to have been persistently harassed by him over the matter. All individuals we consulted had consistent accounts. We even visited the upon confirming that our name was on the deed. During this process, we were informed of the backstory about S from several neighbors. They subsequently visited and inquired about the expected timeline for our departure, to which we responded that it would never occur, as we legally owned the property and it was not ours to relinquish. We acknowledged that S had lost the property and expressed our regret for her misfortune. We conveyed that we understood the emotional distress caused by the loss of family property due to her son's negligence. However, we emphasized that the loss was not our responsibility and that we were not in a position to simply relinquish the property we had purchased with our own resources. We had invested significant time and resources into refurbishing the property, and upon recognizing the circumstances, we proceeded to provide a detailed account of its historical significance within her family and the emotional distress associated with its potential loss. Additionally, we highlighted the unfortunate incident involving P.O.'s involvement, which resulted in the property's confiscation from its rightful owners amidst the turmoil surrounding their child's arrest. In our inquiry, we posed the question of why they did not place a bid for the property during the auction, thereby acquiring it back after its initial loss. Given that we purchased the property from P.O. for approximately $50,000, and given that he was still generating a modest profit from it even after investing significant time and resources into it prior to selling it to us, it is evident that they could have easily purchased it at a significantly reduced price at auction. They could have then explained that they felt the house and property were being unjustly taken from them and that they were unwilling to pay for something that rightfully belonged to them. We reiterated our sincerest apologies but asserted that we would not accept any loss on the property, particularly given the considerable time, effort, and resources invested in its improvement. We acknowledged her circumstances and proposed a sale at a fair market value of $100,000, which, given the property's location and condition, represented a reasonable price. The property was renovated at a cost of $50,000, with an additional $30,000 spent on materials. Several months of labor were also invested to complete the renovations. In light of these costs, the price of $100,000 was deemed to be a reasonable valuation. However, the purchaser offered a counteroffer of $40,000, stating that the property should not be sold for that amount. To pay anything at all for something that rightfully belongs to her. When we stated that was an inadequate offer, she responded by saying that she understood the considerable effort we had invested in repairing the property and that we had purchased a significant quantity of materials to do so. Consequently, she offered an additional $10,000 to compensate for the work we had done on the house. When we informed her that the purchase price from P.O. was $50,000, she became upset and accused us of lying. The individual in question had previously referred to the property as a complete dump and asserted that it was not worth the purchase price. This was accompanied by a further instance of name-calling, in addition to a characterization of the property as a dump. This was particularly hurtful given the significant investment of time, effort, and resources that had been made in the property. As a result, we felt compelled to terminate the interaction and request that she leave the premises. We made it clear that she was no longer welcome and that we would not sell the property to her, even if she offered a higher price. We would never sell our house to her, even if she offered us double the market value. This response evidently incensed her, prompting her to launch a volley of insults as she departed. Subsequent events revealed that she had disseminated a series of unfounded allegations throughout the neighborhood, including the baseless claim that we had illicitly obtained the property in question. Initially, we chose to disregard these assertions, operating under the assumption that they lacked any basis in truth. Subsequently, an individual arrived at our residence brandishing a firearm and demanded that we vacate the premises. We had no prior acquaintance with this person, but we were aware of his reputation as the peacekeeper of the neighborhood. He was responsible for addressing any disturbances, and most residents in our community held a favorable opinion of him. They described him as a reasonable individual and a valuable presence in a community where there was a lack of strict adherence to the law. The majority of residents of the area considered themselves to be law-abiding citizens and expressed gratitude for his presence. He was perceived to have worked diligently to maintain a peaceful environment, and it was noted that he often exercised more restraint than law enforcement officials. It is noteworthy that the surrounding area is divided into two primary sections. One section is populated by a predominantly older demographic, characterized by a tranquil and harmonious coexistence. The other is inhabited by individuals who exhibit a less inclination towards adherence to the law. Those who abide by the rules of conduct further into the wilderness and away from prying eyes prefer to be situated at the edge of the peaceful part, separated by approximately a mile or so of woodlands and farmlands. Based on previous experiences and descriptions, we hypothesized that this individual was the same person. To test this hypothesis, we informed him that we were unaware of the situation and invited him in for a beer and conversation. We permitted him to bring his firearm. However, we informed him that we would be bringing our own firearm as well. It is notable that the majority of individuals in my hometown possess a firearm. Indeed, there are more gun stores than there are dollar stores. Consequently, we were not particularly concerned about the possibility of him having a firearm with him. This is not to say that we were complacent, it is simply a reflection of the fact that in our town, it is a common practice to carry a firearm for self-defense. If someone were to point a firearm at you, which did not occur in this instance, then that would be a different matter. If this incident had occurred in a different context, the outcome might have been different. To return to the main narrative, the individual in question agreed to speak with us after a few hours of discussion and clarification. He stated that he had formed an erroneous assumption and apologized for the misunderstanding. He explained that he had become emotionally invested in the rumors and acted impulsively, and that such an incident would not recur. He also expressed gratitude for our purchase, noting that when he relocated, the community was more content. He was spared the necessity of hearing complaints about loud music and inebriated teenagers stumbling through the night and nearly being struck by vehicles. We subsequently engaged in some light-hearted banter, and he departed without uttering another word. It is now time to address the reason behind Mr. Peacekeeper's susceptibility to the rumor. This interlude, while somewhat tangential, represents a pivotal juncture in the narrative. Subsequently, circumstances began to deteriorate. Additionally, it is noteworthy that the events of this side story do, to some extent, overlap with those of the subsequent part of the narrative. However, for the sake of coherence, it is imperative to proceed with the account. As previously mentioned, a quarter of her property was allocated for the construction of a convenience store. This establishment proved to be immensely popular within the community, situated as it was in a highly convenient location. However, its popularity was not solely attributable to the convenience aspect. The prices were considerably higher than the market rate, and the customer service was also below standard. However, there were some positive aspects to the business. If customers found mold on food items, they would sometimes offer a refund. Additionally, the store was the only convenience store in the area, which contributed to its popularity. For miles, if one had to purchase groceries and was unwilling to drive all the way to town, the store was conveniently located nearby for many residents. We even made a point of patronizing the store on numerous occasions, despite our initial differences. Its proximity was a significant factor in its popularity. Additionally, the store's reputation in the neighborhood was largely positive. The proprietors were determined to retain ownership of their convenient establishment, and they would have been willing to resort to force to prevent anyone from attempting to take it from them. I could comprehend the sentiment, and this was at a time when the N family were generally regarded as decent individuals. Consequently, when rumors began to circulate, people were inclined to believe them. However, the rumors about the Anns stealing an entire house were dismissed because they were perceived as implausible. For the most part, people still trusted her. However, people did believe the other rumors. There were, in fact, plenty of rumors, but they were mostly small and petty. No one ever cared about them. Even assuming all of the rumors about us were true, there was much more that could be said about some other people in our neighborhood. Therefore, no one ever paid any attention to them. They did avoid us, however. This was due to the fact that she had an evident enmity towards us, and nobody wished to incur her displeasure by offending her, for fear of being excluded from her store. Consequently, they all ignored us and left us to our own devices. However, after a few years, he was released from prison and had nowhere to go. He was permitted to move back in with her. She was not pleased at the idea of him living with her, so she rented him an apartment above her convenience store. She forbade he was prohibited from holding any further parties on the property. However, he was not required to pay rent, as he was merely expected to operate the store when it was busy. This was not a frequent occurrence. Despite these circumstances, he continued to engage in fraudulent practices. While he was operating the register, he would frequently charge customers twice for the same item and retain the additional funds. This was discovered on multiple occasions. Upon returning to the store for a refund, the proprietor always provided an excuse that the register was broken. However, we informed her that her son was engaging in double-charging practices and likely pocketing the additional funds. Despite her apparent entitlement, she did not engage in any illegal activities. We enjoyed her store and did not wish to cause any trouble. Instead of expressing gratitude for bringing this matter to her attention, she informed us that our perceptions were erroneous and, in a cordial manner, requested that we refrain from contacting her again. We respectfully complied with her request and shared the information with some of our neighbors. It had taken years to reach a point where some of them would even acknowledge us, let alone engage in conversation. We are grateful to have made some friends. After some time, we had finally established connections with our neighbors. We had been informed that bringing Christmas treats to one's neighbors is an effective method for fostering positive interactions. Despite this, they expressed gratitude, although they also indicated that they did not fully believe our claims. Nevertheless, the information rapidly disseminated throughout the neighborhood. Subsequently, we encountered an individual who we later learned was known as Mr. Peacekeeper. He arrived at our residence once more, this time displaying a markedly more amiable demeanor. He largely disregarded the rumors that had been circulating. He was aware that the majority of the rumors were false and that we had conversed with him on several occasions since then, not on any significant matters, but on more amicable terms. He would occasionally visit for a beer and discuss local events and matters with us. He interacted with most individuals at least once a year to remain informed and ensure a peaceful environment. He was not in favor of police presence and instead devised a plan to address the situation. The job was more secure, so there was no longer a need for them to be present. However, everyone, including us, was pleased with this arrangement. It permitted children to walk unaccompanied to the lake, even through the less salubrious parts of the neighborhood. Nevertheless, he was adamant that he did not approve of the rumors that we were spreading about our neighbors and, in particular, their children. He informed us that he had already spoken to them and that they believed the rumors to be the result of a misunderstanding due to registration issues. He advised us that, if we did not want to cause any further problems, we would need to stop spreading these rumors. At that moment, we were motivated to present him with evidence to the contrary, but we recognized that he was unlikely to accept it if we provided it. He had a high regard for and placed considerable trust in her, and would typically defer to her judgment. Given that they had dismissed the matter as a mere register error, we were uncertain about the efficacy of attempting to persuade him otherwise. Consequently, we acquiesced and expressed regret for any inconvenience caused, emphasizing that we felt wronged and were genuinely concerned about protecting the few friendships we had forged in the neighborhood. He accepted our apology, but offered a final cautionary advice before departing. We listened and made up our minds to stop shopping there unless we absolutely had to. However, everything changed after a couple more years. At that time, we had already pointed out the discrepancies and rumors had begun to spread around the neighborhood. Despite this, Mr. Peacekeeper himself went around and told every single person that the rumors were false. They had started because of our property feud with N. I will get to that a little later. People began to pay more attention to their receipts after shopping there and noticed the same patterns. It is probable that these funds were retained by the proprietor until such time as they were able to be expended. The proprietor was aware of this, yet chose to do nothing and instead attempted to silence those who had voiced their concerns by disseminating rumors. It is notable that small country stores such as this one rely entirely on their regular clientele, who reside in the surrounding neighborhood. During the warmer months, when people are on vacation, these stores enjoy significant profits. However, these profits are insufficient to sustain the stores through the winter months. Eventually, Mr. Peacekeeper took action. He was able to discern the relevant information and subsequently expressed his displeasure verbally. We could hear him verbally reprimanding them in person. It was a highly satisfying experience, but that was only the beginning. He did not merely reprimand them, he also visited every residence in the neighborhood that same day and informed each resident of their activities. He even took a pile of receipts with him to provide proof to anyone who requested it. It is noteworthy that Mr. Peacekeeper was a highly trusted individual in the neighborhood. In the span of 24 hours, he effectively destroyed their business. Local patrons ceased their patronage, and the store continued to operate at a loss. While tourist and seasonal customers sustained business during the summer months, the influx of these customers was insufficient to offset the losses incurred during the winter. After 2 consecutive winters, the store was forced to close for the winter months. This resulted in the disposal of over 90% of the stock each fall and the purchase of new stock each spring. In the spring, the venture was deemed uneconomical, leading to the permanent closure of the business after 3 years. This marked the beginning of a decline in the business's reputation in the neighborhood. The resulting respect from the community enabled the establishment of connections without significant effort. The previously ignored and mistreated business owners began to receive recognition. However, this was only the beginning of the decline. To understand the subsequent events, it is necessary to examine the subsequent developments in greater detail. Further background work is required. Apologies for the length of this piece, but it should not be too lengthy. It is worth noting that the subject in question is extremely nosy. It is not possible to walk outside without her watching our every step, whether through her window or when she is outside walking her dog, collecting her lawn, or pulling weeds. She will often invent excuses to justify her presence outside. It is also worth noting that she watches us when we are walking around our property. There is little that we can do to avoid her attention. We have plans to set up a small pool and hot tub out back and really don't want to be watched while we're trying to relax in our bathing suits. We therefore started looking into a privacy fence, with the intention of being considerate and neighborly. We kindly informed her that we would be putting up a fence, but she adamantly rejected this idea. We informed her that we would be putting up a privacy fence, but we still had to live with the consequences of her rejection. Given her continued presence on the property, we offered to discuss the specifics of the proposed fence with her, including its color, shape, and other design elements. We sought to ensure that the fence would not be an eyesore for her, given her apparent preference for staring at our property. Despite her actions, we continue to strive to be exemplary neighbors. Regarding the placement of the fence, we aim to avoid any future disputes by clearly defining its boundaries. We plan to place the fence at. We would like to clarify that we have taken the initiative to obtain a copy of the deed and a map of our property lines from the courthouse, as we believe it is important to have accurate information to avoid any potential disputes. We were surprised to discover that approximately 1/3 of our property was being claimed by N. She had constructed a small shed and even a garden on the disputed area. We would also like to highlight that our property is not a simple rectangle, but rather a unique shape that resembles a half hexagon or a trapezoid. This is due to the presence of a line of trees that runs through our property, which is not common in all states. The property in question is of an unusual shape and the property lines are somewhat irregular. In fact, there is a line of trees that cuts through part of our property, which according to the deed and property map is a small triangular section. However, the trees make it appear to be a square. The other side of the trees was claimed by the other party when the issue was raised. The response was one of extreme distress, with accusations of dishonesty and theft. The disputed property was not a significant concern to us, as we had lived there for years without any issues. The property in question was, in fact, hers. To facilitate a mutually agreeable resolution, we proposed a sale or a trade involving a portion of her property. There was a portion of her property that connected with ours that was highly inconvenient to maintain. Extending it slightly would significantly enhance the ease of management. Furthermore, it would provide us with additional space to pursue our desired activities. However, she categorically declined, asserting that she would never compensate for something that already belonged to her. She was also reluctant to consider a gift. The property in question was taken from her without compensation, particularly given that it was previously taken from her. Since that time, a significant and ongoing property dispute has arisen between the parties. As previously stated, the area in which the property is located is rural, with numerous unusual property boundaries. In many cases, the boundaries are not clearly defined, and the deeds are hundreds of years old. Instead of using precise measurements, they refer to temporary landmarks, such as an oak tree or a large rock next to a stream. Many of these landmarks could be the number of disputed properties in our area is likely underestimated. In addition, the potential for significant financial gain from a relatively small plot of land has prompted our state to enact stringent legislation and regulations governing property disputes, including those involving surveyors. As a case in point, a landowner recently prevailed in a dispute against a major corporation over a mere zero. The land in question, comprising 1 acre, was the subject of a dispute between two parties. The outcome was that the landowner was awarded over $1 million in damages. While the property lines were clear and recent, the case demonstrates the strict nature of the laws governing such matters, particularly with regard to surveyors. In the aforementioned case, a surveyor may be susceptible to bribery by a large corporation facing the loss of millions of dollars for a small plot of land. However, this is unfair to the true landowner. How can the balance be struck? The legislation in our state establishes that if a surveyor, whether through honest error or otherwise, issues a survey that is inaccurate by a few feet, they may be subject to significant penalties, including a substantial fine, license revocation, and prohibition from surveying in the state. Additionally, they are required to notify and refund all clients for up to 10 years prior to the incident. Clients may then request an additional survey from a non-affiliated surveyor at their own expense. Affiliated surveyor at the expense of the original surveyor, extending to every customer up to 10 years prior to the incident and everyone since then as well. In the event that the previous clients were not found to have accepted a bribe or blackmail, they may also sue the surveyor for damages caused by changes to the property line resulting from the surveyor's malpractice. In the event that a property line is incorrectly identified due to the surveyor's negligence, the client is entitled to receive appropriate rent for any property that the surveyor may have omitted during that time. In the event that a surveyor is found to have accepted a bribe or blackmail, all damages and additional fees are to be paid to the individual who bribed or blackmailed them. In addition to the time and financial costs associated with litigation and the general inconvenience, surveyors in this area tend to avoid property disputes. Consequently, when a dispute arises, it is not a simple matter of arranging a surveyor's visit. It also involves unexpected expenses. Unfortunately, before we could find a suitable surveyor, we encountered an individual who may have engaged in bribery or other forms of undue influence. Despite our best efforts, the property line was not accurately delineated, with one minor discrepancy. It is unclear whether this was intentionally omitted or simply overlooked. Our property apparently extends approximately 1 foot from her residence. This presented a challenging and somewhat amusing situation to navigate. However, it is now clear that this is merely a fraction of the property that she is attempting to illegally claim as her own. Whenever we are able to find a surveyor, she always introduces herself in a nonchalant manner and mentions that she has already had her portion of the property surveyed. She also makes subtle suggestions that there might be a property dispute involved. This immediately dissuades anyone who might be interested in surveying our property from doing so. I am sure you can appreciate the reasons behind this. The land markers provided by the bank surveyor at the time of purchase were not available for use prior to our relocation. It is unclear how this occurred. It is probable that the cost of hiring a surveyor would be equivalent to the value of the land in question, or potentially higher. This is due to the lack of available surveyors willing to undertake the task, given the inherent risks involved. It is evident that the aforementioned professionals would be placing their entire careers at risk. However, we are currently saving in order to hire a surveyor, which is a lengthy process. To provide context, a few months ago, a severe storm caused a tree on the disputed property to fall. This tree was situated in close proximity to the road. The tree fell onto the road, destroying part of our neighbor's property, which is located across the street from us. Additionally, the tree fell onto a vehicle, damaging a brand new sports car while it was being driven down the street. Fortunately, no injuries were sustained during the incident. However, the cleanup process required several days. It is now time for us to receive a bill in the mail for over $200,000, which is more than our house and property was worth after we completed the necessary repairs. It is also important to note that malicious compliance is a significant factor in this situation. For those who may be unaware, it is important to understand that most property or home insurance policies will not cover damages to other people's property. In the majority of cases, the onus is on the insured to prove that they could have reasonably prevented the damage in question. For instance, if a tree on public property, such as a road, falls and causes damage to another party's property, the insured is held liable for the resulting damages. This is a standard practice in insurance policies. In our particular locality, when we received a bill from an insurance company for an incident involving a tree on private property, we contacted the company to inform them that the tree was not on their property. They inquired about the circumstances and said that they would investigate the matter further and contact us within a week. We subsequently received another letter from the insurance company, which included a copy of the deed and a printout of the property line with a tree in question highlighted in red, indicating that it was situated on our property. They demanded full payment within 30 days of their initial notice or they would take legal action. We were informed that we had 2 weeks to respond. We contacted the insurance company once more and reiterated that the tree in question was not on our property. Initially, the agent engaged in a back-and-forth discussion, attempting to justify the claim. However, we maintained our position, emphasizing that the tree's location was indisputably on our property. We asserted that the tree in question was not on our property. Furthermore, we argued that regardless of how inaccurate the printout might be, it would be implausible for anyone to believe that the tree was situated that far off the property line. We then provided them with the number of the surveyor that we had hired. They expressed their intention to contact the surveyor and investigate the matter further. The insurance company requested that we contact the surveyor to investigate the matter further. However, they reiterated that we had approximately 2 weeks to prepare the payment if our claims could not be confirmed. We did not receive any further communication from them. It is important to recall the potential consequences of providing false survey results. Even if the surveyor admitted to accepting a bribe, there was no evidence that the amount was significant enough to compensate for his potential losses. In such a scenario, it is plausible that he would have to leave the country, making it unlikely that he would provide the insurance company with information that differed from what he had shared with us. We subsequently contacted the insurance company to inquire about the status of our claim. We endeavored to ascertain the facts surrounding the matter. The agent appeared satisfied perusing the documentation. However, due to confidentiality constraints, they were unable to divulge significant details. Nevertheless, they did confirm that an evidently contested claim had been filed. This claim, much like ours, asserted that the property in question did not belong to the claimant. Furthermore, they stated that the surveyor had corroborated the findings. Given that we did not contest the surveyor's conclusions and that the surveyor had been retained by the insurance company, there was no rationale for the insurance company to doubt the veracity of the results. As long as we did not challenge the results, the onus of proof rested with the insurance company. All damages caused by the fallen tree should be attributed to the tree itself. However, the agent was unable to provide further clarification. We were satisfied with this response, as it aligned with our expectations. Given my previous experiences, I was not inclined to dispute the insurance company's decision. Nevertheless, I was willing to pay the necessary fees. It is evident that we were discontented with the outcome. We are uncertain about the financial status of the other party, but it appears that they had sufficient funds to settle the matter without resorting to the sale of additional property. Since then, we have refrained from further engagement regarding the property dispute. However, we are contemplating the possibility of hiring a surveyor to ascertain the land's boundaries. At this juncture, the issue at hand is not so much the land itself, but rather the underlying principle. It is evident that whenever she looks at us, she is distinctly displeased. The fact that we relinquished our land to her does not seem to be a source of satisfaction. It is, after all, free land. How could it be otherwise? One might be forgiven for laughing at such a complaint. However, should she attempt to spread rumors about us, it is likely that she will be unsuccessful, as we have made friends with a significant proportion of our neighborhood. Furthermore, our reputation is now such that nobody trusts us, since they discovered that we were literally stealing from everyone in the neighborhood under their noses. Furthermore, they were aware of the situation and did not take action to stop it. As a result, they are now in a difficult position, unable to control the situation. They have simply observed the consequences of their actions, which have had a detrimental impact on the other party. It will be interesting to see what happens next. This additional information is provided for those who wish to gain a deeper understanding of the situation. While we were contemplating the installation of a privacy fence, we opted for an invisible dog fence for our canines. For those unacquainted with this technology, it is a small electrical wire buried underground that is connected to a special collar worn by the dog. When the animal approaches a certain distance, the collar emits a beep that alerts the owner. Dogs do not enjoy prolonged exposure to the mild electric shock that the device emits. We do not endorse the use of shock collars, so we had to be convinced of the necessity of this approach. One of us held the device across the line and experienced a sensation that could be described as a mild tingling, but that did not cause any significant discomfort. It is recommended that the dogs be conditioned to the beat before they are released into the yard. This allows them to become accustomed to the sound of the beep and associate it with turning around. The goal is to provide the dogs with the freedom to roam the yard without being confined to the house. At the time, we lacked the financial resources to construct a physical boundary between our property and that of our neighbor. Our fence was situated within our property line, which was relatively short, and we also sought to prevent our dogs from entering our neighbor's property. It appeared as though we were intentionally marking the location for the fence, as our neighbor accidentally drove over it with her lawnmower, despite the fact that it was more than 5 feet beyond the claimed property line. That day, we learned that electrical lawnmowers and electrified wires do not coexist harmoniously. Her mower was rendered inoperable, and all electrical components were damaged. She purchased a new mower, seemingly motivated by a desire to assert her dominance and surpass our markers. The most intriguing aspect of this incident is that, given the mower's considerable distance from our property, she had no plausible means of attributing the damage to us. Nevertheless, she attempted to disseminate unfounded allegations, though they ultimately proved ineffective. It would have been a futile and irrational act to blame us for the incident. She never even inquired about purchasing a new mower or other equipment. It is likely that she was aware of our response if she had done so. In any case, I hope you enjoyed this account. I will provide another example in the near future. This one concerns a different situation in which my mother's acquiescence resulted in a significant financial loss for her company and the complete closure of her department. I will present this account tomorrow or the day after.